President Biden and Vice President Harris will meet with Asian American leaders during their visit to Atlanta on Friday in the wake of Tuesday's deadly shootings. In a tweet yesterday, the president called the attacks un-American and said they must stop. Meanwhile, Vice President Harris, who is of South Asian descent, addressed the shootings while speaking to reporters at the White House.
I do want to say to our Asian American community that we stand with you and understand how this has frightened and shocked and outraged all people, but knowing the increasing level of hate crime against our Asian American brothers and sisters, we also want to speak out in solidarity with them and acknowledge that none of us should ever be silent in the face of any form of hate.
For more insight now, we're joined by CBS News senior White House correspondent Weijia Jiang. The White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki addressed Tuesday's shootings in Atlanta at her press briefing yesterday. I want to play some of what she had to say.
I think there's no question that some of the damaging rhetoric that we saw during the prior administration, blaming, calling COVID, the Wuhan virus or other things, led to, perceptions of the Asian American community that are inaccurate, unfair, have raised, threatening, has elevated threats against Asian Americans, and we're seeing that around the country.
So when it comes to Democrats, we've certainly been hearing many leaders publicly condemn the rise in hate crimes against Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders. What are we hearing from Republicans? And do we know if the White House plans to address the issue of anti-Asian violence in the country further?
So, Anne-Marie, we have heard from several Democratic lawmakers who have publicly condemned the surge in attacks even before the shootings that we saw in Atlanta. And, one thing that has been missing is the same sort of reaction from their Republican counterparts. After the shootings, Senator Marco Rubio did tweet that the violence against Asian Americans is unacceptable, and he condemned the attacks, but, he does not have a lot of company. And I have been asking Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell's office for a statement because we have not heard from him. And he, of course, is a critical GOP leader, and he has not said anything about this recent surge in violence. And it's notable because he is married to an Asian American woman, the former Secretary of Transportation, Elaine Chao. And so I think one reason why we might not be hearing a lot from his party is because what we just heard from Jen Psaki. This is impossible to divorce from the former president and from, what role he may have played with his rhetoric. And as with anything that has to do with him, it is a prickly issue because, then these Republicans have to, even if it's indirectly, criticize former President Trump. And that's something a lot of them aren't willing to do. But in this case, it seems like a no-brainer when you're talking about an entire group of Americans who are being attacked on a daily basis. But we will continue to watch for reaction and hopefully report back that we're hearing more of it.
You make an excellent point, Weijia, which is Daniel Dae Kim, who's expected to testify on Capitol Hill this morning, has said that for too long, violence against Asians, the misogyny, the rhetoric, especially over the course of the last year, has all too often gone ignored. And here you've got lawmakers that are essentially proving him right because they are unwilling or perhaps afraid to even obliquely criticize the language that former President Trump used. And, I note that Shannon Lee, the daughter of Bruce Lee, she's not, she's just a regular American, but she sort of put it in succinct words. Because a lot of what we heard, Weijia, and you are no stranger to this, over the course of the last year, especially when the former president used this language, was, well, he's just you're just kidding. I mean, why are you so sensitive to, the jokes? And what Shannon Lee was essentially saying is, this is why people are sensitive to that kind of language, because of what we're seeing now, which is a significant spike in violence against the AAPI community.
Well, and Vlad, President Trump was not alone. Many of these Republican lawmakers also and continue to use phrases like Chinese virus, China flu, Wuhan flu. And so, if they were to condemn these attacks publicly, then they would have to talk about the root issue here, which is why it's become, acceptable to use that sort of language, and whether or not that has played a role in this surge of violence that we are seeing. And so that sort of personal accountability may be another reason why we're not hearing from them, because they're not ready to take responsibility for their own words. But you're absolutely right, Vlad, that these attacks, this discrimination is nothing new. It's just that now we are at a point where I think the community is vocalizing what's happening, and so other people who are not in the Asian American community are taking note of what's happening.
Yeah, let me just point out, too, that, Amara Walker, who's a correspondent at CNN, was preparing for a live shot, and somebody walked by her live shot and shouted virus to her. Now, where would somebody come up with the notion that, an Asian American, she's Korean American, why would you say that to somebody?
Right.
If you didn't have, if you weren't somehow plugged in to the language that's been used around this pandemic over the course of the last year. That's just a random person who, said something to another person who they didn't even know.
Right. And there's so much ignorance around this that we are not even talking about the fact that she is Korean American, that Thai Americans, Vietnamese Americans, Japanese American people are also being targeted, because we are responding to the immediate effects of this ignorance, that we're not talking about the root of the problem, which is ignorance and people being misinformed. Because even if there is anger around the Chinese virus and around the origins of COVID-19, which were in China, that doesn't mean anyone who vaguely looks Chinese is Chinese. And so I think there's so many issues to unpack, and it's very complicated, but it all starts with education, which there is a lack of when it comes to Asian American history.
Yeah, I hope, Weijia, that when the president goes to Atlanta, that you will be there. Sorry, Anne-Marie. I was just saying, it's such a momentous occasion for the president of the United States to travel, Anne-Marie, to Atlanta, to be there, to stand in solidarity with the families, especially given that we haven't had a lot of reporting on who they are, for a lot of reasons that we can break down later.
Right. So President Biden.
Overall,
sorry, go ahead, Anne-Marie.
I was going to say, because we have to say goodbye to you, I think that overall, when people sort of dismiss this language as a joke, what the impact is that it's dehumanizing. It literally takes the humanness away from individual people. Those women are not mothers, they are not sisters, they are not reporters, they are not immigrants who have worked very hard. They are objects. And objects that you can take your frustration out on. That's what that joke does. That's
precisely.
The impact.
And what we heard from that spokesperson in the sheriff's office who was in uniform, he said, that the suspect had a temptation that he wanted to eliminate. And so, the problem somehow is not the suspect who has these demons, but there's a problem that he can eliminate, and he did. And so the rhetoric there, the words that particular spokesperson used, not only in that instance, but in others, is really troubling to illustrate the exact point that you're making.
Yeah. Now, we normally spend this time talking about all manner of issues related to the White House. We focused on one area, but I think it's an important thing for this country and for us a conversation for us to have. Unfortunately, we've run out of time now, Weijia, though, so we have to let you go. But we'll catch up with all the other White House stuff at another time.
We will. There's plenty of it. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Weijia.